No one likes to talk about kids getting hurt, but it's happening every day. Child abuse and neglect is a serious issue in the United States. Did you know there are over 8,362 children that are in Oklahoma's custody? 617 of those children are Choctaw. In Bryan County alone, 158 children are in custody, and 53 of those kids are Choctaw. There are nearly 1,000 Choctaw children in custody in the United States. However, you should take note that these numbers fluctuate due to more children coming into custody or children being adopted and are no longer in custody anymore. Teachers see kids generally 8 hours a day and 5 days a week. But what about when the kids go home from school? Are you as a teacher, do you ever wonder about your students' safety when they're at home? There is no question that teachers make an incredible impact in children's lives. But today, I'd like to talk to you about how you can make an even bigger impact in a child's life. A child that needs someone to stand up for them. While school is in session, this could be one of the only times that kids feel safe. School could also be one of the only places that a child would feel comfortable enough to disclose child abuse or neglect in their home, especially if they have a teacher that they trust. If you as a teacher suspect child abuse or neglect, it is imperative you make a report to the Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline. As a refresher, the Choctaw Nation Children and Family Services Department would like to come up with a panel of child welfare workers, law enforcement officers, and trauma therapists to present quarterly to school personnel on signs of child abuse and neglect, what to do when a child discloses, the emotional trauma accompanied with abuse and neglect, reporting of child abuse and neglect, and the process of a child welfare investigation. With this information, school personnel will better recognize, report, and respond to children who are in need of someone to take a stand for them. So, let's talk about child abuse. The Oklahoma Department of Human Services defines child abuse as harm or threatened harm, or failure to protect from harm or threatened harm to the health, safety, or welfare of a child by a person who is responsible for the child. Safety or welfare, including but not limited to non-accidental, physical injury or mental injury, sexual abuse and or sexual exploitation. There are several types of child abuse: physical abuse, neglect, sexual abuse and or exploitation, and emotional abuse. As a teacher, it is important to know indicators of each type. This is where the child welfare workers would present on indicators and signs of abuse. To elaborate on the amount of child abuse and neglect that's in this area and the impact that it has on our kids, in 2014, state agencies found an estimated 702,000 victims of child maltreatment. This would pack 10 modern football stadiums. And over here in this picture, more than 70% of the children who died as a result of child abuse or neglect were 2 years of age or younger. More than 80% were not yet old enough for kindergarten. To elaborate more on indicators, physical abuse indicators include questionable bruises or welts, questionable burns, questionable fractures, and questionable lacerations or abrasions. It is also important to recognize behavioral indicators of abuse, such as if a child is afraid to go home, if they arrive at school early or stay late and don't want to go home, if a child wears inappropriate clothing for the weather, such as wearing a jacket when it's 100 degrees outside. This could be the parent or guardian's way to try to hide bruising on the child. The child welfare worker would go over the definitions of each type of abuse, as well as physical and behavioral indicators of each type of abuse. After learning about signs and indicators of abuse and neglect, the child welfare worker would then discuss reporting. Each person is considered a mandated reporter, but this is especially critical for school personnel. Title 10A, Section 12-101B of the Oklahoma statute state, every person having reason to believe that a child under the age of 18 years who is a victim of child abuse or neglect shall report the matter promptly to the Department of Human Services. Reports shall be made to the statewide centralized hotline. The child welfare workers would also discuss the legal responsibilities of reporting, meaning telling a principal, a school counselor, or a school-based social worker is not satisfied. You have to make the report yourself and get the 6-digit referral number. The child welfare worker would also advise failing to report child abuse or neglect is a crime in the district attorney could press charges. Title 10A states, any person who knowingly and willfully fails to promptly report suspected child abuse or neglect, or who interferes with the prompt reporting of suspected child abuse or neglect, may be reported to local law enforcement for criminal investigation, and, upon conviction thereof, shall be guilty of a misdemeanor. Any person with prolonged knowledge of ongoing child abuse or neglect, who knowingly and willfully fails to promptly report such knowledge, may be reported to local law enforcement for criminal investigation, and, upon conviction thereof, shall be guilty of a felony. So 6 months and 1 day, that would be considered a felony. The child welfare worker would also discuss immunity. Title 10A of Oklahoma statutes state, any person who in good faith and exercising due care, who reports suspected child abuse or neglect, or who allows access to a child by persons authorized to investigate a report concerning the child, shall have immunity from any liability, civil or criminal, that might otherwise be incurred or imposed. Any such participant shall have the same immunity with respect to participation in any judicial proceeding resulting from such report. The child welfare worker would discuss other pertinent information pertaining to the reporting of child abuse and neglect. The child welfare worker would also discuss the child welfare process, meaning when a referral comes down from the hotline and an investigator goes out, and then whether or not a child is removed from the home or services are placed in, the child welfare worker would go over in more detail that process. It is my opinion that teachers have many questions when it comes to working with child welfare, and I think that this would be a great opportunity for the entire process to be discussed and then questions be answered. Law enforcement would then discuss their involvement with child welfare and what to do when a child discloses. Law enforcement and child welfare workers work together to make sure children are safe. A lot of times, this means children are removed from their homes and criminal charges are pressed. It is important to know what to do and what not to do when a child discloses child abuse or neglect, as the child could possibly need to be forensically interviewed, or there could also be a criminal investigation that takes place, or both. A forensic interview is generally conducted at a child advocacy center. The room is generally kid-friendly, but the interviews are videoed. This keeps a child from having to be re-traumatized by telling their story numerous times. When a child discloses, here are a few examples of how to respond. Do not ask questions. Listen to the child and reassure them that they did the right thing by telling. And keep your own feelings and reactions under control. I know a lot of times when a child would maybe disclose molestation, it's very important that we don't go, I'm so sorry that happened to you. But you need to listen to the child. You don't ask questions, and don't ever promise anything. But let them make sure they know that they did the right thing by letting you know what happened. Law enforcement would then go into greater detail about the do's and do nots when a child discloses. The trauma therapist would then talk about the emotional state of children who have endured child abuse, as well as the trauma they've experienced by being removed from their homes. Kids, no matter what they've endured, they're always going to love their mom and dad. And it's going to be traumatic for them when they're removed from their home life because they're so used to living that type of life. The trauma therapist would also discuss what they do to help child victims overcome traumatic experiences. As a teacher, it would be important to have knowledge about the different types of diagnoses that could accompany children who have experienced trauma, such as post-traumatic stress disorder and other disorders. It would help the teacher better understand that sometimes acting out behaviors that some students exhibit as a result of the trauma that they've experienced, as well as some things that might trigger the children. Having a panel of child welfare workers, law enforcement, and trauma therapists would be greatly beneficial to school personnel to help recognize, report, and respond to child abuse and neglect. Teachers make an incredible difference in a child's life. They could also someday save a child's life. I'll leave you with this. It never really ends. Children surviving through the cold winds of neglect and all kinds of misfortune and vile treatment. We see them every day, with broken smiles that endure the painful kicking of their malnourished bellies protruded with dreams that may never see the light of conception. But with just a little kind word, a handful of promise, a heart of compassion, a smile full of hope, we would hold hands together in helping them conceive their dreams, because they are the little bits and pieces that make us whole. That is by Chinoye Chidulo. If you suspect child abuse or neglect, please write down this number and make a report to the State Oklahoma Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline.